Step away for that fence, lady. Nobody's buying this little ranch owner act.
This is my land, Sergeant. My deed is in the truck, and my name is on every county record.
Your name? On land like this? Come on. I've seen better lies from drunks sleeping behind gas stations.
Call the recorder's office before you turn a bad guess into a career-ending mistake.
You don't warn me. You answer questions, show hands, and quit pretending you belong here.
He nodded to the officer, and the cuffs snapped shut behind her back. Odessa didn't fight. She just stared past him at the barn, the fence, and the land her family had owned for generations. Sergeant Brackett had no idea he was arresting the woman who controlled half the state beneath his boots. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The morning sun blazed down on Blackwell Mesa as Odessa Raines knelt beside the broken fence rail, her weathered hands working the wire cutters with practiced precision. Sweat beaded on her dark skin beneath the brim of her cowboy hat. Her cream tank top stuck to her back in the heat. The red barn cast a long shadow across the dusty ground behind her. "Hand me that wire, Silas," she called to the older man loading feed sacks from the truck bed 20 yards away. Silas Boone straightened his creaking back and wiped his forehead with a bandana. At 67, he moved slower than he used to, but his eyes stayed sharp. "This heat's gonna kill the cattle if we don't get them closer to the creek," he said, tossing her a coil of barbed wire. Odessa caught it without looking up. "Soon as I get this section tight, we'll move the herd. Can't have them breaking through again." The fence stretched across rolling grassland that seemed to go on forever. Odessa's family had protected this land for 3 generations. Every post, every gate, every water line. She knew them all by heart. The work never stopped on a ranch this size, but she wouldn't trade it for anything. The growl of an engine made her look up. A white county cruiser kicked up dust as it barreled down the dirt road toward the barn. It stopped hard near the gate, and 2 officers climbed out. The younger one, Deputy Wade Mercer, adjusted his belt and looked around nervously. The older one, Sergeant Doyle Brackett, slammed his door and marched straight toward Odessa. His bald head gleamed with sweat. His face was already red with anger. "You there!" Brackett shouted, pointing at Odessa. "Step away from that fence and put your hands where I can see them." Odessa stood slowly, dusting off her jeans. She kept her voice calm and level. "Good morning, officers. Can I help you with something?" Brackett's small eyes narrowed. "We got a complaint about trespassing on this property. Someone called in saying there's been unauthorized people working this land." "That's interesting," Odessa said, pulling off her work gloves, "because this is my ranch, has been my family's land since 1952. Brackett snorted and looked her up and down like she was something stuck to his boot. "Your ranch? Lady, do you have any idea how much this land is worth? Women like you don't own property like this." The insult hit its mark, but Odessa kept her face blank. She'd heard worse. "I can show you the deed if you'd like to see it." "I don't need to see nothing from you," Brackett snarled. "You're squatting on private land, and you're going to come with us right now." Silas dropped the feed sack he was holding and walked over slowly. "Now, hold on there, Sergeant. Miss Odessa owns this place fair and square. Her granddaddy bought it decades ago." Brackett whipped around to face the older man. "Did I ask you to speak, old-timer? You want to join your boss in the back of my cruiser?" "Look at the gate," Odessa said, keeping her voice steady. She pointed to the wooden post beside them. "See that brand burned into the wood? That's the Raines family mark. Been there since my grandfather put it up." The RR brand was clear as daylight, weathered but deep. Brackett glanced at it and shrugged. "Anyone can burn a mark into wood. That doesn't prove anything." "Then let me get my deed packet from the truck," Odessa said, taking a step toward her pickup. Deputy Mercer moved fast, grabbing her wrist before she could reach the door handle. "Not so fast." Odessa looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. "Deputy, You're touching me without cause on my own property. I suggest you let go." Mercer's grip tightened instead. He was young, maybe 30, with pale skin that burned easy in the sun. His eyes darted between Odessa and Brackett like he was waiting for approval. "The deed's right there in my glove box," Odessa continued, not trying to pull away. "Legal documents with the county seal, water rights certificates, property tax records going back 70 years. Brackett stepped closer, invading her space. His breath smelled like coffee and cigarettes. "I don't care what fake papers you got cooked up. You're trespassing, and you're coming with us." "This is a mistake," Odessa said firmly. "You're arresting the legal owner of this land. My attorney will have something to say about that." "Your attorney?" Brackett laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "What attorney's gonna represent some ranch hand pretending to own half the county?" Silas took another step forward, his weathered hands clenched into fists. "Sergeant Brackett, you're way out of line here. Miss Odessa's family—" "Shut your mouth!" Brackett roared, spinning to face him. "Say another word, and you'll be in handcuffs too. You hear me?" The threat hung in the air like dust from the cruiser's tires. Silas's jaw worked, but he stayed quiet. Odessa felt the deputy's hand still gripping her wrist. She looked directly at Brackett. "You're making a legal mistake on private land, Sergeant. I'm warning you one time." Brackett's face went darker red. "Are you threatening a police officer?" "I'm stating a fact," Odessa replied. "You have no legal grounds to arrest me on my own property." "Turn around," Brackett growled, grabbing her other arm. Before Odessa could react, he spun her around and twisted both arms behind her back. The motion was rough, designed to hurt and humiliate. Mercer fumbled with his handcuffs, his hands shaking slightly. "This is wrong, and you know it," Odessa said through gritted teeth, as the metal closed around her wrists. Brackett shoved Odessa against the side of his cruiser, the metal hot from the afternoon sun. The impact sent a sharp pain through her shoulder, but she kept her face blank. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her wince. "Take a good look, everybody," Brackett called out to the growing crowd at the fence line. His voice carried across the yard like he was announcing at a rodeo. "Here's what happens when somebody thinks they can squat on prime ranch property and pretend they belong." Two of Odessa's ranch hands had stopped their work and moved closer. Joe Martinez clutched his wire cutters, his young face tight with anger. Tommy Clearwater stood beside him, both men looking like they wanted to climb the fence and do something stupid. Silas held up a hand to keep them back, but his eyes never left Brackett's face. "This woman's been living out here like she owns the place," Brackett continued, loud enough for the neighbors who had stopped their trucks along the county road. "Probably been stealing cattle, forging papers, running some kind of con game." "That's a lie," Silas said firmly. "Miss Odessa's family—" "I told you to shut up," Brackett roared, taking a step toward the older man. "You want to be an accessory to fraud? Keep running your mouth." Deputy Mercer walked over to Odessa's pickup truck, his boots crunching on the gravel. He opened the driver's door and started pulling things out. Work gloves hit the ground first, then a thermos of coffee. When he opened the glove compartment, papers scattered in the wind. "Hey!" Odessa called out. "Those are legal documents." Mercer grabbed the thick manila envelope marked Raines Property Records and dumped its contents into the dirt. Deeds, water certificates, and survey maps fluttered across the yard like broken wings. "Fake papers," Brackett announced to his audience. "Probably printed them off the internet last night." One of the neighbors, an older white woman in a sun hat, leaned forward on the fence. "I never did see any family out here before," she said to her husband. "Always wondered who was running this place." Brackett grinned at the comment. "See? Even the neighbors know something's not right." Odessa watched her grandfather's original deed blow toward a fence post, the county seal barely visible through the dust. 70 years of legal ownership scattered like trash. "Silas," she said quietly, her voice carrying just far enough. "Call Helena Cross at the law office in town. Tell her to secure the trust vault immediately." Brackett laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Helena Cross? The fancy attorney? Lady, you really think some high-dollar lawyer's going to take your case when you can't even afford a decent pair of boots?" A young woman with a phone appeared at the edge of the crowd. Marnie Vale, the local news blogger who made her living off other people's troubles. She held her phone up, recording everything. "Are you getting this?" Marnie called out to nobody in particular. "Local woman arrested for trespassing on ranch property." The phone stayed focused on Odessa in handcuffs, not on Brackett's rough handling or the scattered legal documents. Just the humiliating image of a black woman in custody. "This land belongs to my family," Odessa said clearly, looking directly at the camera. "It has for 70 years. Brackett's face went dark red. He stepped closer, invading her space. "People like you don't hold ranches this size, sweetheart. You might fool some bleeding heart lawyer, but you don't fool me." The words hit like a physical blow. People like you. Odessa had heard that phrase her whole life, usually followed by doors slamming shut. "My grandfather bought this land legally in 1952, she said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. "Paid cash for every acre." "Your grandfather?" Brackett sneered. "Right, and I'm the King of England." Some of the neighbors chuckled. The sound cut deep. Deputy Mercer walked back over, his search complete. "Nothing else in the truck, Sergeant." "Course not," Brackett said. "Squatters don't carry real identification." He grabbed Odessa's arm and pulled her toward the rear door of the cruiser. "Time to go have a real conversation downtown, where we can sort out exactly who you really are." The car door slammed shut with Odessa inside. Her cowboy hat lay forgotten in the dirt beside the scattered papers, the wind already starting to bury both in dust. The Dry Creek County Sheriff's Station smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh white glare that made the beige walls look sickly. Deputy Mercer pushed through the glass doors first, holding them open while Sergeant Brackett guided Odessa inside with a firm grip on her elbow. "Look what we caught trespassing out on ranch land," Brackett announced loudly to the room. His voice carried across the open bullpen where 3 deputies sat at metal desks, typing reports and answering phones. Every head turned. Conversations stopped. Odessa walked with her back straight, dust still coating her jeans and boots from the arrest. Her hands remained cuffed behind her, but she did not duck her head or try to hide her face. She met each stare directly, refusing to give them the shame they expected. "Found her acting like she owned Blackwell Mesa," Brackett continued, steering her past the desks like a prize. "Probably been squatting out there for months." Deputy Martinez, a thin man with graying hair, looked up from his paperwork. "Blackwell Mesa? That's some expensive real estate." "Exactly," Brackett said. "Too expensive for people like her." The booking desk sat near the back of the station, manned by a heavy-set deputy with tired eyes. Behind him, Sheriff Hollis Cade emerged from his office. Cade was 58, with silver hair and the kind of smooth face that came from years of telling people what they wanted to hear. He wore his uniform pressed and clean, every crease perfect. "What's the situation?" Cade asked, his voice calm and professional. "Trespassing and criminal impersonation," Brackett replied. "Claims she owns property worth millions." Cade nodded slowly, studying Odessa with the measured look of a man who never rushed to judgment. "I see. Have you allowed her to make her phone call?" "I want to call my attorney," Odessa said immediately. "In due time," Cade replied smoothly. "We need to process you first. Standard procedure." Odessa knew the law. They could not legally deny her a phone call indefinitely. But in small-town stations, standard procedure could stretch for hours. Brackett unlocked her handcuffs and pushed her toward a holding cell in the corner. The cell was small, maybe 8 feet by 10, with concrete walls painted institutional green and a metal bench that doubled as a bed. The toilet sat in the corner without even a partition for privacy. "Home sweet home," Brackett said, slamming the door shut. The lock clicked with finality. He turned back to the other deputies, raising his voice for Odessa's benefit. "Vale Dominion Development filed a complaint this morning about someone living illegally on their land. Guess we know who that someone is. Vale Dominion Development." The name hit Odessa like cold water. She had heard whispers about Preston Vale's company buying up ranch land across the county, always at prices too good to refuse, or too bad to survive. "They're gonna want to press full charges," Brackett continued. "Can't have people thinking they can just move on to private property and claim it as their own." Deputy Mercer shifted uncomfortably near the booking desk. His eyes kept darting toward the cell, then away. Something about this whole situation bothered him, but he stayed silent. 20 minutes later, the station's front door chimed. Expensive shoes clicked across the linoleum floor. Odessa heard voices, low and respectful. "Mr. Vale," Sheriff Cade said warmly, "thank you for coming down." Preston Vale stepped into view, and Odessa understood immediately why he made people nervous. He was tall and lean, maybe 52, with steel-gray hair combed perfectly back. His charcoal suit probably cost more than most people made in a month. Everything about him screamed money and power, from his gold watch to his handmade leather shoes. But it was his smile that made Odessa's skin crawl, not cruel exactly, but pleased. Like a cat that had cornered exactly the mouse it wanted. "Sheriff Cade," Preston said, extending a manicured hand, "I appreciate your department's quick response to our complaint." Our complaint. Odessa noticed he said our, not my. This was bigger than one man's greed. Preston walked slowly toward the holding cell, his hands clasped behind his back. He studied Odessa through the bars like she was an interesting specimen. "Miss Raines," he said softly, "you should have taken my offer when you had the chance." Odessa stepped closer to the bars. "What offer?" "To sell Blackwell Mesa quietly. No lawyers, no fuss, no public embarrassment." His smile widened. "I'm always willing to pay fair market value for land I need. The land is not for sale." "Everything is for sale, Miss Raines. It's just a matter of finding the right pressure points." Behind him, Sheriff Cade nodded approvingly. "Mr. Vale has always been generous with property owners in this county." "Generous?" Preston repeated, as if the word tasted good. "Yes, but generosity has its limits." Sergeant Brackett appeared beside Preston, holding a clipboard. "Sir, do you want to review the complaint details before we file the official report?" Preston glanced at the papers without really reading them. Complaint number 2024-0847, correct? Odessa's blood went cold. How did he know the complaint number before looking at the paperwork? Complaints were supposed to be assigned after filing, not before. "That's right, sir," Brackett confirmed, though his voice carried a note of surprise. The setup was complete and obvious. Preston had not just filed a complaint about trespassing, he had orchestrated the entire arrest, probably planned it days in advance. The complaint number proved it. Deputy Mercer heard the exchange too. His face went pale, and he stepped back from the group, suddenly very interested in his computer screen. "Well," Preston said, straightening his tie, "I think we can consider this matter resolved. Sheriff Cade, perhaps we should discuss the next steps in your office?" "Of course," Cade replied immediately. "Deputy Brackett, continue processing the suspect. Full charges." The two men walked toward Cade's office, their voices dropping to whispers. Odessa caught fragments: federal interest, mineral rights, and clean transfer. Left alone in the cell, Odessa sat down on the metal bench and pulled off her right boot. Hidden inside the leather lining was a small metal tool her grandfather had given her years ago. Not a weapon, just a simple awl for marking fence posts. She knelt beside the wall and carefully scratched into the concrete. 2024-0847. The complaint number that proved her arrest was planned. Evidence, even if nobody wanted to see it yet. The metal scraped softly against stone, each number a promise that this was far from over. 1 hour later, the station's front door opened with authority that made everyone look up. Helena Cross stepped inside, her black heels striking the floor with military precision. She was 45, sharp-featured, wearing a tailored Navy suit that said serious business. Behind her came another woman, older, carrying a state government briefcase. Helena's eyes swept the station like a scanner, taking in Deputy Mercer's nervous fidgeting, Sergeant Brackett's aggressive stance, and Sheriff Cade emerging from his office with Preston Vale still beside him. "I'm Helena Cross, attorney for Odessa Raines," she announced, her voice cutting through the station's chatter. "My client was arrested without proper cause. I demand her immediate release." Sheriff Cade straightened his uniform shirt and walked toward her. "Ma'am, your client was caught trespassing on private property. The arrest was completely legal." Helena placed a thick manila folder on the counter. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet. "These are certified land records, state-authenticated property documents, survey maps, water rights certificates." "Lady, I don't care what papers you think you have," Brackett interrupted, stepping closer. "Your client was squatting on land that don't belong to her." The older woman behind Helena stepped forward. "I'm Miriam Bell, Senior Auditor with the State Land Office. These documents carry the full authority of the state government." Cade's confident expression flickered. State auditors could destroy careers with a single report. Helena opened the folder and spread papers across the desk. Maps, deeds, certificates with official seals. "Blackwell Mesa is registered to the Raines Land and Water Trust. Odessa Raines is the controlling trustee." "That's impossible," Preston said, though his voice had lost its smooth confidence. Miriam pulled out a thick binder. "Property records show the trust owns Blackwell Mesa, plus 14,000 acres of adjacent rangeland. But that's not all." She flipped through pages filled with legal descriptions. "The trust also owns the courthouse parking lot, the jail expansion site, the sheriff's training range, and the water easements under this building." The color drained from Brackett's face. "Furthermore," Helena continued, pulling out a state map covered in red markings, "the Raines Land and Water Trust controls mineral rights, conservation easements, timber leases, and water use permits across 47% of this state's private land." Deputy Mercer dropped his pen. It clattered on the floor, the only sound in the dead-silent station. Sheriff Cade stared at the documents like they might burst into flames. "This has to be some kind of mistake." "No mistake," Miriam said firmly. "I've spent 3 hours verifying every certificate, every deed, every water right. The trust was established in 1952 and has been buying land continuously for 72 years. Your prisoner owns or controls nearly half the state." Preston Vale's face went gray. He grabbed the edge of the desk for support. Helena stepped toward the holding cell area. "Deputy Mercer, unlock that cell immediately." Mercer looked at Cade, then at Brackett, then at the documents spread across the desk. His hands shook as he fumbled for his keys. "Wait just a minute," Brackett snarled. "I don't care how much land she claims to own. She was still trespassing." "On her own property?" Helena's voice could have cut steel. "The property your department just proved you don't understand the first thing about." The lock clicked open. Odessa stepped out of the cell, straightening her hat. She looked at each officer, then at Preston, then at the papers covering the desk. She walked slowly to where Brackett stood, his fists clenched, his face red with humiliation and rage. "Sergeant Brackett," she said quietly, "you're still standing on Raines land." That afternoon, Odessa drove her dusty pickup back through the gates of Blackwell Mesa, with Helena and Miriam following in Helena's sedan. The ranch looked different now, somehow smaller after what had happened at the station. The red barn still stood solid against the blue sky, but the morning's violence lingered in the scattered papers blowing across the dirt yard. Odessa parked near the fence where Brackett had first grabbed her. The wind had pushed deed papers against the barn wall, wrapped them around fence posts, and buried some under loose gravel. She knelt down and began collecting them one by one, smoothing out the wrinkles with careful hands. Helena stepped out of her car, still wearing her navy suit, but with dirt now dusting her heels. "Leave the papers. We can get copies from the vault." "No," Odessa said, picking up another page. "These are the ones they touched. The ones they saw." Miriam joined them, her state briefcase heavy in her grip. She watched Odessa gather each scattered document like it was family treasure. "Your grandfather was smart to keep multiple copies of everything." "He had to be." Odessa found the last page stuck under a loose board near the water trough. As she pulled it free, something made her stop. The paper felt different, thicker. The ink looked too fresh. She held it up to the afternoon light. "This isn't right." Helena moved closer. "What do you see?" "This boundary map." Odessa pointed to the property lines drawn in black ink. "The eastern border is wrong. It shows our land ending at Miller's Creek, but we own 3 miles past that creek." Helena took the paper from her hands and studied it. "The seal looks authentic. The signatures match what I saw this morning. But it's not the same map." Odessa's voice was steady, but her jaw tightened. "Someone switched it." They walked quickly to the ranch office, a small building behind the main house with thick walls and narrow windows. Odessa unlocked the heavy door and led them inside. Filing cabinets lined one wall. A steel safe sat in the corner, its combination lock gleaming under the bare bulb. Odessa spun the dial with practiced movements. The safe door swung open, revealing stacks of documents in protective plastic sleeves. She pulled out the original deed packet and spread it across the wooden desk. Helena compared the 2 boundary maps side by side. "The forged one moves your eastern property line inward by over 2,000 acres. That's enough land to build a small town." Miriam opened her laptop and plugged in a portable scanner. "I need to check something." She scanned both maps, then pulled up county records on her screen. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, cross-referencing file numbers, checking digital signatures, tracking changes to land records. After 10 minutes, she looked up with grim satisfaction. "Found it. Someone has been altering your family's county records for the past 18 months. 1 parcel at a time. Small changes that wouldn't get noticed unless someone was looking hard." "Who?" Odessa asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Same digital signature appears on all the alterations." Miriam turned her laptop screen toward them. "It matches the signature on Preston Vale's development permits, his water use applications, and his mineral rights requests." Helena set down the forged map. "This wasn't random. They planned everything. The arrest, the criminal charges, the public humiliation." "Why?" Odessa asked. "Because they needed you to look like a criminal," Helena replied. "A woman with an arrest record for trespassing can't be trusted in court. Preston could challenge your ownership by claiming you're unstable, violent, or fraudulent." Miriam pointed at her screen. "Look at the timing. Every record alteration happened after Vale Dominion Development filed a new permit or expansion plan. They've been stealing your land on paper while preparing to steal it in real life." Odessa walked to the window and looked out at her cattle grazing in the evening light. Her grandfather had bought this land acre by acre, paying fair prices to families who needed cash during hard times. He had saved every deed, every receipt, every handwritten agreement. He had built the trust to protect what he loved. Now, someone was trying to erase that work with forged documents and fake criminal charges. She turned back to Helena and Miriam. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on what I'm seeing," Miriam said, "Preston's family has been doing this for decades. Your records show they've been altering property boundaries, filing false abandonment claims, and using manufactured legal disputes to steal land from black families, native families, and poor ranchers. The sun was setting now, painting the office walls orange and red. Odessa gathered the original deeds and placed them back in protective sleeves. She locked them in the steel safe, spinning the combination dial until it clicked. "The arrest was just the beginning," she said quietly. "They wanted me to look like a criminal, so they could take everything." Helena closed her briefcase. "What do you want to do?" Odessa looked at the safe, then at the forged boundary map still lying on the desk. Outside, her cattle moved slowly toward the barn, following paths her family had maintained for generations. "I want to find out how deep this goes," she said, "and I want to make sure they can't do this to anyone else." As full darkness settled over Blackwell Mesa, Odessa locked the ranch office door and pocketed the key. The real fight was just beginning. The morning sun climbed over Blackwell Mesa as Odessa walked the north pasture with Silas. The old ranch hand moved with careful steps, his weathered face tight with worry. 3 head of cattle lay near the main water trough, their breathing shallow and labored. "Started yesterday evening," Silas said, kneeling beside a young heifer. "They're not eating, won't stand up proper. Something's wrong with the water." Odessa crouched next to the animal and ran her hand along its flank. The heifer's skin felt hot and dry. Its eyes were dull, unfocused. She had seen sick cattle before, but this looked different, deliberate. She stood and walked to the concrete water trough. The water looked clear, but a faint chemical smell hung in the air. Something sharp and industrial that didn't belong on a ranch. "When did you last check the well?" she asked. 2 days ago. Water ran clean and cold." Silas pointed toward the wellhead 20 yards uphill. "Pump's been working fine. No problems with the pressure." Odessa walked to her truck and pulled out a water testing kit. She filled 3 sample bottles from the trough, labeling each with the date and location. Then she walked to the wellhead and took samples directly from the source. The chemical smell was stronger here. She looked up the slope toward the ridge line. A 1/4 mile away, she could see fresh tire tracks cutting through the grass. Heavy equipment had been up there recently. Big trucks with deep treads, moving loads of machinery or materials. "Silas, you got your phone?" The old ranch hand pulled out his cell phone and handed it to her. Odessa took pictures of the tire tracks, the sick cattle, and the water trough. She photographed the wellhead, the pump housing, and the runoff channels that led down from the ridge. Then she saw something that made her jaw tighten. Fresh drilling mud. Dark, oily residue that had dried in the grass near the tire tracks. Someone had been drilling up there, and whatever they pumped out of the ground had run down the hill into her water supply. She climbed the slope, following the tire tracks. At the top of the ridge, she found a cleared area where heavy equipment had torn up the ground. Drill casings lay scattered in the dirt. Empty chemical barrels sat stacked near a temporary access road. The barrels still had labels. Vale Dominion Development. Authorized drilling operation. Temporary mineral survey. Odessa took pictures of everything. The barrels, the drill casings, the torn-up ground. She collected soil samples from around the drilling site and placed them in sealed plastic bags. Preston Vale wasn't just stealing her land on paper anymore. He was poisoning it from underground. The sound of tires on gravel made her turn. A county sheriff's car was coming up the ranch road, kicking up dust as it climbed toward the north pasture. She recognized the driver even from a distance. Sergeant Doyle Brackett. Odessa climbed back down to where Silas waited near the sick cattle. The sheriff's car stopped next to her truck, and Brackett got out slowly. He wore his uniform like armor, his badge catching the morning sunlight. "Got a report about livestock dying," he said, not looking at Odessa directly. "Thought I'd come check it out." 3 cattle are sick," Odessa replied. "Water contamination from illegal drilling on my property." Brackett walked over to the water trough, his heavy boots crushing tire tracks in the mud. He bent down and splashed his hand in the water, destroying evidence of chemical residue on the surface. "Water looks fine to me," he said. "Maybe your cattle got into something they shouldn't have." "There's drilling mud up on the ridge," Odessa said. "Chemical barrels with Vale Dominion labels. Someone's been pumping industrial waste into my groundwater." Brackett straightened up and stepped directly on the clearest tire track near the trough. His boot heel ground the impression into unreadable mud. "I don't see any drilling equipment," he said. "Just looks like normal ranch work to me." Silas stepped forward, holding up his phone. "I got pictures of everything before you got here, Sergeant. The tracks, the chemical smell, the sick animals." Brackett's face went red. "You recording me, old man?" "Just documenting what we found," Silas said calmly, "for the insurance company." "Let me see that phone." Brackett lunged forward and grabbed for the phone. Silas pulled it back, but Brackett shoved him hard in the chest. The old ranch hand stumbled backward and fell into the dirt near the water trough. "Hey!" Odessa shouted, stepping between them. "Get your hands off him!" Brackett turned on her, his face twisted with anger. "You people need to learn some respect. There's authorized development activity happening in this area, and you got no right to interfere." "Authorized by who?" Odessa demanded. "This is my land. Show me a warrant." "Don't need a warrant to investigate livestock deaths," Brackett snarled. "And I'm telling you to stop spreading lies about legitimate business operations." "What legitimate business?" Odessa shot back. "Preston Vale's company poisoned my water supply. That's not business. That's sabotage." Silas struggled to his feet, still holding his phone. His shirt was torn and dirt streaked his face, but his eyes burned with quiet fury. "You got that on video?" Odessa asked. "Every word," Silas replied. Brackett's hand moved to his service weapon. "Delete that recording. Right now." "No," Odessa said. She stood straight, meeting his stare without blinking. "You want the phone? Get a warrant. You want to search my property? Get a warrant. You want to threaten my workers? Find another job." For a long moment, nobody moved. The morning wind rustled through the grass around the sick cattle. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark called from the fence line. Finally, Brackett stepped back toward his patrol car. "This isn't over," he said. "You keep pushing, and you'll find out what happens to people who don't know when to quit." He got in his car and drove away, leaving deep tire ruts in the pasture grass. Odessa helped Silas brush the dirt off his shirt. The old ranch hand was shaken but not hurt. His phone was still recording. "You okay?" she asked. "Been knocked down by meaner bulls than him," Silas replied. "But I never seen a lawman act like that." Odessa looked at the sick cattle, then up at the ridge where Preston's drilling equipment had torn up the ground. The chemical smell still hung in the air. Her water was poisoned, her cattle were dying, and the law was protecting the people responsible. But she had evidence now. Water samples, photographs, and video of a county officer destroying evidence and assaulting an elderly ranch worker. She walked back to her truck and loaded the sample bottles into a cooler. Then she pulled out her phone and called Miriam Bell. "It's Odessa," she said when the state auditor answered. "I need you to test some water samples. Priority rush. Preston Vale just escalated from paperwork to poison." After ending the call, she walked back to where Silas was checking on the sick cattle. The tire tracks leading up to the ridge told a clear story. Heavy equipment had come down the old quarry road, crossed onto her property, and set up an illegal drilling operation. She studied the tracks carefully, measuring their width and depth. The tread pattern would help identify the specific vehicles. The direction they came from would lead her to wherever Preston was staging his operation. The old quarry road wound through state forest land before connecting to the county highway. If Preston was using it to move equipment onto her property, he was probably storing that equipment somewhere nearby. Odessa gathered her evidence bags and sample bottles. She had work to do. That evening, the western sky blazed orange as Odessa and Silas spread fresh hay around the water troughs. The cattle moved slowly, still sick from the poisoned water. Most wouldn't eat. Their eyes looked dull and tired. "We might lose more tonight," Silas said, checking the animals near the fence line. Odessa nodded. She'd spent the afternoon calling veterinarians and water treatment companies. The test results wouldn't come back for 2 days. Until then, she had to haul clean water from town in her truck. She was filling the last trough when black smoke rose from the equipment barn beside the West Corral. "Fire!" Silas shouted. They ran toward the barn. Flames licked through the wooden walls where old hay bales were stacked. The fire moved fast, jumping from beam to beam through the dry timber structure. "Amos!" Silas yelled. Amos Reed was fixing the tractor inside. Odessa could hear coughing from somewhere deep in the barn. The smoke was getting thicker, pouring out through the open doors like a black river. "Call the fire department," she told Silas. She grabbed a horse blanket from the fence and soaked it at the water trough. Then she tied a wet bandana around her face and ran toward the burning barn. The heat hit her like a wall. Inside, burning hay sent sparks flying through the air. Tools and equipment cast strange shadows in the orange light. She could barely see 3 feet ahead. "Amos," she called. "Where are you?" A weak voice answered from the back corner. "Here, can't get out." Odessa pushed deeper into the barn, staying low where the air was clearer. A heavy beam had fallen across the back doorway, trapping Amos against the wall. He was conscious but breathing hard, his face covered with soot. "My leg's caught," he said. The beam was too heavy to lift alone, but the fire was spreading fast across the roof, and burning boards were starting to fall around them. Odessa grabbed a long crowbar from the tool rack. She wedged it under the beam and used a concrete block as leverage. The wood shifted just enough for Amos to pull his leg free. "Can you walk?" "Think so." She grabbed his arm and helped him toward the front door. Behind them, the roof began to collapse with sounds like gunshots. Burning timbers crashed where they had been standing seconds before. They stumbled out into the cool evening air just as the volunteer fire truck arrived. Amos collapsed on the grass, coughing up black soot. His leg was twisted but not broken. While the firefighters worked to save what was left of the barn, Odessa walked around the building looking for clues. Near the side door, she found fresh boot prints in the soft dirt. The tread pattern was sharp and clear, like expensive work boots. Then she saw it. A broken lighter half buried under some loose hay. She picked it up carefully. The metal surface was scratched, but she could still read the company logo, Vale Dominion Development. Sheriff Cade arrived as the fire trucks were packing up. He talked quietly with the fire marshal, a thin man named Garrett, who kept glancing nervously at the sheriff's car. "Looks like an electrical fire," Garrett announced to the small crowd that had gathered. "Old wiring, dry hay. These things happen on ranches." Odessa stepped forward. "I found this near the side door." She held up the lighter. Garrett looked at it, then at Sheriff Cade. "Could have been dropped any time. Lots of people smoke around barns." "Preston Vale doesn't smoke," Odessa said, "and his employees don't have permission to be on my property." "Can't prove arson without more evidence," the fire marshal said quickly. Sheriff Cade nodded. "That's right. No point in making wild accusations without proof." Odessa looked at the burning barn, then at Amos, sitting in the ambulance, with an oxygen mask over his face. The attack had moved beyond paperwork and legal tricks. Someone had tried to burn her barn with a man inside. She walked to her truck and found a glass jar in her toolbox. Carefully, she placed the broken lighter inside and screwed the lid tight. Then she called Helena Cross. "It's Odessa," she said, when the lawyer answered. "Preston just tried to burn down my barn. I need you to subpoena his security logs and employee records tonight." The Dry Creek courthouse was packed by 8 in the morning. Odessa walked through the crowd with Helena, Miriam, and Silas, feeling hostile eyes follow her every step. The room buzzed with angry whispers and hard stares. Preston Vale sat in the front row, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. He had filled the room with his supporters, ranchers who owed him money, developers who wanted contracts, and hired speakers who would say anything for cash. "This is about our community," said Tom Bradley, a local rancher who had been friendly to Odessa's father years ago. Now he stood at the microphone glaring at her. "We can't let outsiders come in and block progress for hard-working families." The crowd murmured agreement. Odessa noticed how he said "outsiders" while looking right at her, even though her family had worked this land for generations. "The Rains woman is holding up jobs," said another speaker, a heavy-set man in a plaid shirt. "Good-paying jobs for real locals who've been here their whole lives." More nods from the crowd. The racism was sharp but careful, wrapped in words like tradition and community values. They never said what they really meant, but everyone in the room understood. Sergeant Brackett leaned against the back wall, his arms crossed and a smirk on his face. When residents shouted over Odessa trying to speak, he did nothing to control the room. Helena stood up when it was their turn. "Your Honor, we have evidence of criminal activity targeting Ms. Rains and her property." She presented the water analysis showing industrial chemicals in Odessa's wells. She showed photos of the burned barn and the Vale Dominion lighter found at the scene. Sheriff Cade interrupted from his seat near the judge's bench. "These are wild accusations without solid proof. Ms. Rains seems to be manufacturing drama to delay legitimate development projects." "Manufacturing drama?" Helena's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Someone poisoned her water supply and burned her barn with a worker inside." Judge Hartwell, a tired-looking man in his 60s, shuffled through papers. The fire marshal ruled it accidental. The water could have been contaminated by natural runoff. "From where?" Odessa asked, standing up. "There's no industrial activity upstream from my wells." "That's not for you to determine," the judge said dismissively. Preston smiled from his front-row seat, enjoying the show. He had orchestrated this perfectly, filling the room with angry voices, controlling the narrative, making Odessa look like a troublemaker standing in the way of progress. Then Miriam Bell stepped forward with a thick folder in her hands. "Your Honor, I'm State Auditor Miriam Bell. I've been investigating land records in this county, and I've found some very interesting documents." The room grew quiet. Even Preston's smile wavered slightly. Miriam opened the folder and pulled out old papers, maps, and photographs. In the 1940s and 1950s, Preston Vale's grandfather, Harold Vale, used fake tax liens to seize property from black families and native families who couldn't afford lawyers to fight back. "That's ancient history," Preston said, his voice sharp. "No, it's current fraud," Miriam continued, "because those seizures were illegal. And for the past 30 years, the Rains Land and Water Trust has been quietly buying back every single parcel that was stolen." She spread maps across the table. "Ms. Rains doesn't just own Blackwell Mesa. Through legal purchase and inheritance recovery, she owns or controls the mineral rights, water rights, and land use agreements for nearly half this county." The room erupted. People shouted questions and accusations. Preston's face went pale, and his polished smile completely disappeared. Odessa stood up slowly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I know exactly what your family buried, Preston, and I know where you buried it." Inside the courthouse, Judge Alton Greer adjusted his reading glasses and studied the papers Helena had spread across his desk. The afternoon light filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the polished wood. "This is quite a claim, Ms. Cross," Judge Greer said, his voice measured and careful. "You're asking me to halt a major development project based on allegations of document fraud." Helena stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back. "Your Honor, I'm asking you to examine clear evidence that Vale Dominion has been using forged deeds to steal property." She pointed to a particular document in the stack. "This deed shows Harold Vale purchasing Lot 47B from the county in 1952 for unpaid taxes. But here's the original tax record from the state archive. She placed a second document beside the first. The taxes were paid in full by Ezra Raines 3 months before the supposed sale. The Vale deed is a complete fabrication. Judge Greer leaned forward, comparing the papers closely. His expression grew more serious as he studied the signatures, dates, and official stamps. The handwriting analysis is conclusive, Helena continued. The same person who forged Harold Vale's signature also forged the county clerk's stamp. And that person worked for Vale Dominion's legal department. Miriam stepped forward with additional evidence. Your Honor, we've identified 17 similar forgeries spanning 4 decades. The Vale family has been systematically stealing land through fake legal documents. The judge removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He had been handling land disputes for 20 years, but nothing this extensive or deliberate. Ms. Cross, what exactly are you requesting? An emergency injunction halting all development activity on Blackwell Mesa until these documents can be properly investigated, and an order requiring the county to preserve all land records in a secure location. Judge Greer looked up at Helena, then at Miriam, then at the evidence spread before him. Preston Vale had money and influence, but the law was the law. I'm granting your request, he said quietly. All development activity on the disputed property is hereby suspended pending investigation. Sheriff Cade, you will ensure that county land records are secured and protected from alteration or destruction. The courtroom doors swung open as word spread quickly through the building. Preston Vale stormed in with his lawyers trailing behind him. Your Honor, this is absurd. Preston's face was flushed red with anger. These people are using fake documents to halt legitimate business. Mr. Vale, Judge Greer said firmly, the documents in question appear to have originated from your family's legal office. Until we determine their authenticity, no construction will take place. For the first time since Odessa had known him, Preston looked genuinely cornered. His usual smooth confidence cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Preston as he tried to reach his car. Camera crews pushed microphones toward his face while he attempted to maintain his composure. Mr. Vale, how do you respond to allegations that your family has been using forged documents for decades? These accusations are completely unfounded, Preston said, but his voice lacked its usual authority. We will fight these frivolous claims in court. Odessa stood on the courthouse steps beside Helena and Miriam, watching the scene unfold. The crowd that had been hostile hours earlier now murmured among themselves, uncertainty replacing their earlier anger. Maybe she was telling the truth, someone said behind her. If the Vales have been stealing land, my granddad always said something wasn't right about how they got so much property so fast. Deputy Mercer approached Odessa as the crowd began to disperse. He looked younger than usual, his face pale and troubled. Ms. Raines, he said quietly, glancing around to make sure Brackett wasn't watching. I need to tell you something. Odessa turned to face him fully. Helena and Miriam stepped back slightly, giving them space to talk. When we arrested you, Mercer continued, his voice barely above a whisper, Sergeant Brackett found that packet of deeds in your truck. He told me to ignore it, said it was just old family papers that didn't matter. Odessa studied his face carefully. She could see the conflict there, the weight of what he was admitting. But I looked at them anyway, Mercer said. After we put you in the cell. Those weren't just family papers. They were legal documents, property records, and they looked more official than anything I'd seen from Vale Dominion. The admission hung in the air between them. Mercer had known the arrest was wrong from the beginning, but he had followed orders anyway. Why are you telling me this now? Odessa asked. Mercer's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. Because what Brackett's been doing, it's not right, and I think it's about to get worse. Odessa looked at this young deputy who had grabbed her wrist and dragged her to jail, who had stood silent while Brackett screamed in her face. Now He was trying to find his conscience. "You have until morning to decide what kind of man you want to be," she said quietly. "Because when this is over, everyone will remember which side you chose." Mercer nodded and walked away, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his decision. As the sun began to set, Odessa drove back toward Blackwell Mesa. The injunction had bought her one night, maybe two if she was lucky. But Preston wouldn't accept defeat this easily. He would regroup, find new tactics, bring more pressure to bear. She needed to use every hour she had to prepare for what was coming next. The ranch gates came into view as twilight settled over the mesa, and Odessa felt the familiar sense of coming home to land that belonged to her family in ways no forged deed could ever change. That night at Blackwell Mesa, Odessa sat at her kitchen table with 3 backup drives spread before her. The injunction had given her breathing room, but she knew Preston wouldn't wait long to strike back. Every trust document, every water certificate, every mineral right needed to be copied and hidden. The house felt quiet around, too quiet. Silas had gone to check the cattle in the north pasture. Amos was repairing fence wire near the barn, his movements still careful from the burns he'd suffered in the fire. Both men had refused to leave the ranch despite the danger, their loyalty running deeper than fear. Odessa inserted another drive into her laptop and watched the files transfer. Deeds from 1923, survey maps from 1951, trust amendments signed in her grandfather's careful handwriting. Each document was another piece of armor for the battle ahead. Headlights swept across the south gate. Odessa's fingers stilled on the keyboard. The lights were too bright, too many. Not a single truck, but a convoy moving fast across the mesa. She grabbed her rifle and stepped onto the porch. The convoy was still a half-mile away, but she could count at least 6 vehicles, police cruisers, county trucks, and something larger bringing up the rear. Her phone buzzed. A text from Silas. "Trucks coming from the north, too. Get out now." Odessa's blood went cold. They were being surrounded. She ran back inside and yanked the drives from her computer. "Silas! Amos!" she called into her radio. "Storm cellar, now. Take the evidence." The convoy roared through the south gate without slowing. Odessa could see Sheriff Cade's vehicle in the lead, followed by Brackett's cruiser and 3 deputies. Behind them, 2 massive bulldozers crawled forward on flatbed trailers. They were heading straight for the family cemetery. Odessa grabbed her keys and the backup drives, then sprinted toward the storm cellar behind the house. Silas appeared from the darkness, breathing hard. "They cut the north fence," he said. "More trucks coming that way." "Take these." Odessa pressed the drives into his weathered hands. "You and Amos get in the cellar and don't come out until morning, no matter what you hear." "Odessa, you can't—" "That's an order." Her voice cut through his protest. "Those drives are the only proof we have. Without them, Preston wins everything." Amos limped up from the barn, his face grim. "What's happening?" "Sheriff's Department," Silas said, "with heavy equipment." The convoy was close enough now that Odessa could hear engines over the sound of her own heartbeat. Flashing lights painted the mesa red and blue. "Go," she told them. "Lock yourselves in and wait." Odessa ran to her old ranch truck parked behind the barn. The engine turned over with a grinding sound, but it caught. She threw it into reverse and back toward the dirt road that led to the ridge. The storm cellar door slammed shut just as the convoy reached the house. Sheriff Cade's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Odessa Raines, you are in violation of a court injunction. Exit the vehicle immediately." Odessa floored the accelerator. Her truck bounced over ruts and rocks as she headed for the back trails she'd learned as a girl. Behind her, deputies were already spreading out across the property. "Stop the vehicle!" Brackett's voice roared from somewhere close. "You're under arrest!" Gunfire cracked through the night. Bullets whined off rocks near her truck. Odessa yanked the wheel hard left and plunged down a cattle trail that cut between 2 ridges. Her headlights swept across narrow passages, She'd navigated 1,000 times on horseback. The truck scraped against stone walls as she pushed deeper into the maze of arroyos. More shots echoed behind her. Engines roared as the pursuit began in earnest. She reached for her radio. "Silas, they're shooting. Stay down." "Copy that," came his voice, tight with worry. Odessa hit the main ridge road and opened up the throttle. The old truck groaned but held together as she flew over rises and dips that would bottom out a city vehicle. Behind her, she could see headlights bouncing wildly as the deputies tried to follow. This was her land. Every turn, every shortcut, every dangerous drop-off was mapped in her memory. She took a hard right onto a trail that led toward Broken Creek, knowing the deputies would have to slow down or risk rolling their vehicles. But Brackett wasn't slowing down. His cruiser's engine screamed as he closed the distance. Odessa could see his face in her mirror, twisted with rage. He rammed her bumper, sending her truck sliding sideways. She fought for control and straightened out, but he hit her again. Harder this time. The trail ahead curved sharply around a boulder field. Odessa knew if she could make that turn, she could lose them in the rocks. But Brackett was right behind her, his cruiser's push bar already touching her tailgate. She downshifted and tried to pull away, but the old truck didn't have enough power. Brackett surged forward and slammed into her rear quarter panel just as she reached the curve. The world went sideways. Odessa's truck lifted off the ground and rolled, metal shrieking against stone. She felt the steering wheel tear from her hands as the cab filled with the sound of breaking glass. The truck flipped twice before slamming into the dry creek bed below the old bridge. Pain shot through her ribs and shoulder. Blood ran down her face from a cut above her eye. The truck lay on its side, steam rising from the crumpled hood. Through the shattered windshield, she could see lights moving toward the cemetery. The bulldozers had arrived. Rain began to fall, drumming against the exposed undercarriage of her truck. Odessa crawled through the broken window, her body screaming in protest. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through her injured ribs. She pulled herself up the creek bank and staggered toward higher ground. In the distance, floodlights blazed around the family cemetery. She could hear diesel engines roaring and the grinding sound of metal against stone. They were tearing down the fence. Odessa limped closer through the rain, using sagebrush and rock outcroppings for cover. The scene ahead made her stomach twist with rage and grief. 2 bulldozers worked in the rain under portable floodlights, their blades scraping away the wrought iron fence that had protected her family's graves for over a century. Deputies stood watching as the machines carved deep gouges in the sacred ground. The rain intensified, turning the disturbed earth into mud that ran red in the harsh light. Odessa crawled from the wreck and saw her grandparents' headstones standing like sentries under the glare of machine lights, waiting for the blades to reach them. The storm cellar beneath the ranch office felt like a war room in the dim light of battery-powered lanterns. Odessa stumbled down the narrow stairs, her left shoulder pressed against the stone wall for support. Blood had dried on her face from the gash above her eyebrow, and every breath sent sharp pains through her ribs. "Jesus Christ, Odessa!" Silas rose from a folding chair, his weathered hands reaching to steady her. "What did they do to you?" "Brackett rammed my truck off Broken Creek Bridge," she said, accepting his help. "I rolled twice before hitting the creek bed." Helena Cross looked up from a laptop computer, her sharp eyes taking in Odessa's injuries with professional assessment. "You need medical attention. I need justice more." Odessa eased herself into a chair across from the state auditor, Miriam Bell, who sat surrounded by boxes of documents. "Did you get the feeds?" Amos Reed, his arm still bandaged from the barn fire, pointed to a row of small monitors displaying grainy night vision footage. "Every camera you placed is still transmitting. We've been watching them tear up the cemetery for the past hour." Odessa's jaw tightened as she studied the screens. The footage was crystal clear, despite the rain. Brackett's cruiser slamming into her truck, Cade arriving with a manila envelope that had to contain the fake seizure order. Preston's bulldozers entering the sacred ground without any legal authority to be there. "They just handed us everything we need," Helena said, her voice carrying quiet satisfaction. "Brackett's assault on you alone is enough for federal charges." Miriam leaned forward, rain jacket still dripping from her late arrival. "But there's more. I found the connection to the old land thefts in the county records. Preston's great-grandfather, Harold Vale, used the same playbook. Forge a lien, intimidate the owner, then claim abandonment when they fled. "Show her the ledgers," Helena said. Amos moved to an ancient wooden trunk that had been hidden beneath a false floor. The metal hinges creaked as he lifted the lid, revealing stacks of leather-bound books that smelled of age and dust. Helena carefully lifted out the oldest volume, its cover worn smooth by decades of handling. "Your grandfather was meticulous," she said, opening to pages filled with precise handwriting. Every stolen parcel, every forged document, every family driven off their land by the Vale family over 3 generations. Odessa traced her finger along entries that detailed systematic theft spanning nearly a century. Names, dates, acreage, methods of intimidation. Her grandfather had documented it all while quietly buying back every stolen acre through shell companies and patient legal maneuvering. "Here's the key passage," Helena said, turning to a page marked with a red ribbon. "The Rains Trust Charter contains automatic reversion clauses. If Vale Dominion or any subsidiary violates cemetery protection laws, water rights agreements, or commits fraud in pursuit of trust property, all disputed holdings immediately revert to the trust." "All of them?" Odessa asked. "Every ranch, every mineral lease, every water right Preston's family stole." Helena's voice was steady as stone. "Your grandfather spent his life building a legal trap. He knew someday the Vales would get greedy enough to spring it." Silas pointed to the live camera feeds. "Look at Monitor 3. The screen showed Preston Vale himself, standing in the rain beside the bulldozers, gesticulating wildly as his machines tore through the cemetery fence. He wore an expensive raincoat and seemed to be directing the operation personally. "He's not just ordering the desecration," Miriam said, studying the footage with growing amazement. "He's supervising it, on camera, in real time." Odessa stared at the monitors, watching Preston's empire destroy itself one bulldozer blade at a time. Every motion of those machines was triggering the very legal mechanisms her grandfather had built to reclaim everything the Vale family had stolen. The fool doesn't realize he's just activated his own destruction. The ranch office filled with gray dawn light as Deputy Wade Mercer knocked quietly on the door. Silas opened it with his hand resting on his belt, eyes hard with suspicion. "Easy, Silas," Odessa said from her chair. "Let him in." Mercer stepped inside, his uniform wrinkled and his face pale with exhaustion. He carried a manila folder clutched against his chest like a shield. Rain dripped from his hat brim onto the wooden floor. "I shouldn't be here," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "But you are," Odessa replied, her tone cold as Winter Creek water. "Why?" Mercer's eyes darted to Helena, Miriam, and Amos before settling back on Odessa. "Because what we did last night was wrong. The seizure order Brackett gave us? It's fake, completely fabricated." He opened the folder with trembling hands and spread documents across the table. Radio transcripts, text messages, copies of warrants that had never been filed with the court. His phone buzzed constantly with missed calls from Brackett. "This message here," Mercer pointed to a printed text exchange. "Brackett tells Cade to make it look legal at 11:47 p.m., 20 minutes before we got the order to move on your property." Helena leaned forward, her sharp eyes scanning the evidence. "These are criminal conspiracy charges, multiple felonies." "I know," Mercer said. "I've been a cop for 8 years. I've never seen anything like this. Brackett told us you were a dangerous squatter with warrants. He said Preston had legal authority to remove you." Odessa studied the deputy's face, looking for traces of the man who had grabbed her wrist, who had stood silent while Brackett humiliated her. "You expect forgiveness because you brought papers?" "No, ma'am," Mercer said quietly. "I expect nothing, but I can't live with what I did. My dad raised me better than that." Silas crossed his arms. "Your conscience is mighty convenient, now that the truth's coming out." "Silas," Odessa said sharply, "we need his evidence more than we need to punish his guilt." She turned back to Mercer. "What else do you have?" Mercer pulled out his phone and showed them a group text thread. Brackett's messages were brutal and explicit. "Hit her hard enough to make her quit fighting. Preston wants her broke and gone by morning. No witnesses at the cemetery site." Miriam Bell took photos of each message with her own phone. "This is enough to bring down the entire sheriff's department leadership." Helena was already opening her laptop. "Wade, are you willing to testify under oath that the seizure order was fabricated?" "Yes, ma'am." "Will you sign an affidavit stating that Sergeant Brackett ordered you to assault Ms. Raines without legal justification?" Mercer's voice cracked slightly. "Yes, ma'am." Odessa pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the sharp pains in her ribs. "Then here's what we're going to do. Helena, file emergency federal claims for cemetery desecration and civil rights violations. Include the reversion clauses from grandfather's trust documents." "Already drafting," Helena said, fingers flying across her keyboard. "Miriam, contact your office. Tell them we have evidence of systematic land fraud going back 3 generations. Get federal investigators moving." Miriam was already dialing. "They'll want to see everything within the hour." Odessa turned to Mercer. "You're going to call Brackett and tell him you lost radio contact during the chase. Buy us time while he thinks his cover story is still intact." "What about the bulldozers?" Silas asked, pointing to the monitors where Preston's machines continued tearing through the cemetery fence. "You're going to gather every loyal rancher within 50 miles. Block those machines, but no violence. I want them stopped, not martyred." Silas nodded grimly. "The Morrison boys, the Valdez family, old Joe Hutchins. They'll come." Odessa walked to the window, watching the sun climb over Blackwell Mesa. In the distance, she could see dust clouds rising from Preston's destruction. Preston's holding his groundbreaking ceremony at noon. Full media coverage, investors, county officials. He wants cameras. He'll get them. "Odessa," Helena said carefully, "you're talking about confronting them publicly. After last night, Brackett will be looking for any excuse to escalate. Let him try." Odessa picked up her weathered cowboy hat from the table, examining the dents and scuffs from her crash. "This ends where it started. On my land, in front of witnesses, with the truth." She placed the hat firmly on her head, adjusting the brim despite the bruises along her scalp. "Preston Vale wants to make his fortune on my family's bones. Time to show him what those bones are worth." Mercer stood up, clutching the evidence folder. "Ms. Raines, for what it's worth, I'm sorry." Odessa met his eyes without flinching. "Sorry doesn't fix what you broke, Deputy, but helping fix it might be a start." She walked toward the door, each step deliberate despite her injuries. Behind her, Helena's fingers never stopped typing. Miriam spoke rapidly into her phone, and Silas was already calling ranchers who would ride when asked. Odessa stepped into the morning light, breathing in the scent of rain-washed sage and distant smoke. The evidence convoy was forming behind her. Helena's sedan loaded with legal documents. Miriam's state vehicle carrying investigation files. Amos driving the ranch truck with boxes of her grandfather's ledgers. She mounted her horse with careful movements, settling into the familiar leather saddle that had carried her across this land for decades. The mare nickered softly, sensing the tension in the morning air. Preston Vale had chosen to make his stand on Blackwell Mesa, believing he had broken her the night before. He would learn the truth about Rain's women soon enough. They didn't break. They just got more dangerous. The noon sun blazed overhead as Preston Vale stood before a gathering of cameras, investors, and county officials near the damaged cemetery fence. His expensive gray suit gleamed despite the dust, and his silver hair caught the light as he smiled for the news crews. Behind him, bulldozers sat idle beside the torn earth where headstones had been uprooted in the darkness. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston began, his voice carrying across the mesa with practiced confidence, "today marks the beginning of something extraordinary. Vale Horizon Estates will transform this barren wasteland into a premier luxury community, bringing jobs, prosperity, and progress to our county." Sheriff Cade nodded approvingly from the crowd, his uniform crisp and his badge polished. Sergeant Brackett stood nearby, arms crossed, scanning the horizon with nervous energy. The investors, men in clean suits who had flown in from the city, murmured approval as Preston gestured toward survey stakes driven into the sacred ground. "This development represents a $60 million investment in our future," Preston continued, his smile widening. 40 luxury homes, a private golf course, and a spa resort that will employ hundreds of local workers. The previous landowner has been fairly compensated through legal acquisition procedures. Marnie Vale stood behind the cameras, her phone recording every angle. She had edited last night's footage to show only Odessa's truck fleeing from law enforcement, cutting out any evidence of the violent pursuit or the cemetery destruction. Then the crowd heard it. Hoofbeats. Odessa Raines appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the bright sky on her bay mare. Her weathered cowboy hat sat firmly despite the bruises visible on her face, and her cream tank top showed dirt stains from crawling through the wreckage. She rode down the slope with steady purpose, her horse picking its way through the scattered headstones. Behind her came a convoy that made Preston's jaw clench. Helena Cross emerged from her sedan, carrying a briefcase thick with legal documents. Miriam Bell stepped out of her state auditor vehicle with federal investigation files. Silas Boone drove the ranch truck with Amos beside him, boxes of ledgers visible through the rear window. Deputy Wade Mercer followed in his patrol car, his face pale but determined. But what made the crowd murmur was the line of pickup trucks cresting the hill behind them. Ranchers from neighboring counties, the Morrison boys, the Valdez family, old Joe Hutchins, and dozens of others who had worked this land for generations. They parked in a rough semicircle, engines running, doors opening to reveal men and women in work clothes who knew the difference between justice and theft. Preston's smile faltered as Odessa dismounted near the cameras. "I'm sorry, miss, but this is a private development ceremony," he said loudly. "You'll need to leave immediately." "Actually," Odessa said, her voice carrying clearly across the mesa, "you're the one who needs to leave. You're standing on protected Raines cemetery land." The investors shifted uncomfortably as Helena stepped forward with an open folder. "Preston Vale, you are hereby notified that this ceremony constitutes desecration of a registered historical burial ground, in direct violation of federal protection statutes." Preston's face darkened. "Security, remove these trespassers immediately." 2 men in black polo shirts moved toward Odessa, but she held up her hand. "Every camera here is now recording a felony cover-up. The burial ground you're standing on has been protected by federal law since 1923. Your bulldozers destroyed graves last night under a fabricated seizure order." "That's a lie!" Brackett snarled, stepping forward. His face was red with rage as he recognized the woman who should have died in the crash. "This woman is a criminal who— Who what, Sergeant?" Deputy Mercer's voice cut across the gathering as he walked into view of the cameras. "Who survived the illegal pursuit you ordered last night? Who crawled out of the truck you rammed without cause?" The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Investors began backing away from Preston as Mercer continued, "The seizure order was fabricated. Preston Vale paid Sheriff Cade to forge federal documents. I was ordered to assault Ms. Raines without legal justification. You lying piece of... Brackett started toward Mercer, but Odessa stepped between them. Go ahead, Sergeant, she said calmly. Hit a woman in front of news cameras. Show everyone what kind of justice Preston Vale's money buys. Preston's investors were now openly retreating toward their vehicles. The news crews had turned their cameras toward the confrontation, abandoning the staged ceremony for the real story unfolding before them. Marnie Vale frantically tried to redirect attention, but the ranchers had formed a wall between her and the action. This is over, Preston, Odessa said. Your development is built on stolen land, forged deeds, and murdered history. Every document you filed is fraud. Preston's composure finally cracked. He leaned close to Brackett and whispered harshly, End this now. Brackett's eyes went wild with desperation and fury. The cameras, the witnesses, the collapsing lies, none of it mattered anymore. With a roar of rage, he charged straight at Odessa in full view of everyone. Brackett's tackle came like a bull charging, low and brutal. Odessa saw it coming but couldn't dodge fast enough on the uneven ground. His shoulder drove into her ribs, reopening the wounds from the truck crash. They both hit the dirt hard beside the yellow bulldozer, dust exploding around them as broken fence posts scattered like kindling. The impact knocked the wind from Odessa's lungs. Brackett rolled on top of her, his meaty fist slamming toward her face. She twisted her head just enough that his knuckles scraped across her cheek instead of breaking her nose. Blood welled from the fresh cut. You should have stayed down, Brackett roared, drawing back for another punch. Odessa rolled hard to the left, using the momentum to slip out from under him. Her hand closed around a loose lariat that had fallen from the bulldozer's rigging. As Brackett lunged after her, she whipped the rope around his extended arm and yanked it tight against a broken fence brace. What the hell? Brackett fought the rope, but Odessa had learned to tie cattle at age 12. The more he pulled, the tighter it got. Behind them, the ceremony erupted into chaos. Preston's 2 security men rushed toward Silas and Amos, but the old ranchers were ready. Silas caught the first man with a solid right hook that dropped him beside the gravel pile. Amos, still moving stiffly from his burn injuries, used his walking stick to trip the second guard into a pile of broken headstones. "Get them all!" Preston screamed from behind his limousine. "Every last one!" The crowd of investors scattered toward their cars as news cameras swung wildly to capture the violence. Marnie Vale stumbled backward in her high heels, falling into the mud as ranchers closed ranks around the ceremonial platform. Brackett finally freed his arm from the rope, his face purple with rage. "I'm gonna kill you right here." He charged again, but Odessa had already moved. She grabbed a loose gate chain from the bulldozer's bed and swung it low, catching Brackett's ankles. He stumbled but didn't go down, instead grabbing her by the shoulders and driving her backward toward the open cemetery trench. Odessa felt her boots sliding on the muddy slope where the bulldozer had torn up the sacred ground. Brackett was bigger, stronger, and fueled by desperate fury. His hands closed around her throat as he tried to force her down into the desecrated grave. "This is where you belong," he snarled, spit flying from his lips. "With the rest of the dead." Odessa's vision started to blur, but her hands stayed calm. She felt along the ground until her fingers found the end of the lariat again. In one smooth motion, she hooked it around Brackett's boot and pulled hard while driving her knee up into his stomach. Brackett gasped and loosened his grip just enough. Odessa twisted away from the trench edge, using his forward momentum to send him sliding face first into the muddy slope. She followed him down, pressing her knee into his back and wrapping the rope around his wrists with ranch-trained precision. "Stay down," she said through gritted teeth, blood dripping from her split lip onto his uniform. The sound of car engines roaring to life filled the air. Sheriff Cade had broken from the crowd and was sprinting toward his patrol cruiser, his badge glinting in the sunlight as he abandoned his allies. "Block the roads!" Silas shouted. Ranch trucks immediately moved to surround Cade's escape routes. The Morrison boys' diesel pickup blocked the main road while Joe Hutchins's cattle hauler sealed off the back trail. Cade's cruiser skidded to a stop, trapped between vehicles and angry ranchers. Black SUVs crested the ridge with federal plates gleaming. Agents in dark suits stepped onto Blackwell Mesa as Odessa stood over Brackett's prone form, her boots firmly planted in the mud of her ancestors' desecrated graves, refusing to fall. Helena Cross stepped forward with a leather briefcase as federal agents secured the scene. Cameras from 3 news stations focused on her composed face, while Preston Vale struggled against handcuffs behind his limousine. "Ladies and gentlemen," Helena's voice cut through the chaos with courtroom authority, "what you witnessed here today was not simply trespassing or property destruction. It was the final act that triggered automatic legal protections built into the Rains Land and Water Trust over 60 years ago." She opened the briefcase and withdrew a thick folder sealed with red wax. The state seal gleamed under the afternoon sun as she broke it open in full view of the cameras. "These are reversion documents, filed with the state in 1963 by Elijah Rains," Helena continued. "They contain specific trigger clauses that activate when anyone attempts to destroy native burial grounds, forge property deeds, or use criminal conspiracy to seize trust land." Miriam Bell stepped beside her, holding a tablet displaying satellite footage and water meter data. "Our investigation found systematic fraud spanning 3 decades. Vale Dominion has been altering county records, bribing officials, and illegally diverting water from protected sources." "You can't prove any of that," Preston shouted from behind the federal agents. His expensive suit was torn and muddy, his polished confidence cracking like broken glass. Helena smiled coldly. "Mr. Vale, by destroying this cemetery today, you activated every reversion clause in the trust. All disputed holdings, mineral claims, and water rights associated with your fraud now return to Odessa Rains immediately." The crowd of investors began backing toward their cars as the full weight of the revelation hit them. Millions in development deals were evaporating in real time. "Furthermore," Miriam added, her voice carrying across the mesa, "Sheriff Hollis Cade is hereby removed from office for conspiracy and evidence tampering. Sergeant Doyle Brackett faces charges of assault, destruction of property, and abuse of authority." Brackett, still tied with rope at the edge of the cemetery trench, spat mud from his mouth. "This is all lies. We were following orders." "Deputy Mercer," Helena called to Wade, who stood frozen near the patrol cars, "your cooperation with our investigation will be noted in court proceedings. Your choice to provide evidence against your superiors may reduce your charges significantly." Wade's face went pale, but he nodded slowly. The badge on his uniform seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. Odessa walked over to the news cameras, her split lip still bleeding but her voice steady. "My family has protected this land for generations. We never forgot what was stolen from others. Today, I'm announcing the creation of the Rains Restitution Fund." She gestured toward the broken headstones scattered by Preston's bulldozers. "Every family whose land was taken through the Vale Network's fraud will have the opportunity to file claims. We're not just taking back what's ours. We're giving back what was stolen from everyone." The federal agents loaded Preston into an unmarked SUV as his empire collapsed around him. Investment contracts became worthless paper. Water rights reverted to their original owners. Mineral leases were voided across half the state. Sheriff Cade sat in the back of another federal vehicle, his hands cuffed behind his back, watching his career end through bulletproof glass. 3 weeks later, the changes were visible across the county. The cemetery at Blackwell Mesa had been carefully restored, each headstone reset in its proper place. Silas Boone and his crew finished rebuilding the burned barn, this time with fire-resistant materials and modern ventilation. New signs appeared along roads throughout the state: Rains Land and Water Trust, protected property. Families who had given up hope of recovering stolen land received official letters inviting them to present their claims to the Restitution Board. At sunrise on a clear morning, Odessa saddled her horse and rode the repaired fence line of Blackwell Mesa. The wire stretched tight and true between new posts. The gates hung straight on reinforced hinges. Every boundary marker stood exactly where her grandfather had placed it 60 years before. She had never been trespassing on her own land. Everyone who tried to erase her had been standing on property that belonged to the Rains family all along. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.